Willkommen. That is German, I think, for welcome to Belief Talk. It is Monday night here at Revive Church. We're doing Revive Talk tonight. Tonight's going to be a little unique. We're talking about some more of the forgotten ministers of the American Revolution. And so yesterday in the sermon, I don't know if y'all watched it, we talked about some forgotten founders. And we believe in America today that we have founding fathers like John Adams, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, those kind of fellas. But yes, while they were all important, George Washington, obviously those kind of people, it was actually the pulpits that most regarded as what started the revolution in the hearts of the people. So you can go back and watch that sermon, and you can kind of get and see. And I had pointed out some different ministers, people I've never heard of, some people that were around during the First Great Awakening. Also some black ministers that we never probably heard about, like Henry Hoosier. Obviously, think about the Hoosier State in Indiana. We're going to talk about some preachers tonight that were forgotten. And again, if you guys want to comment down below where you guys are from, that would be fantastic. We could even pray for you if you'd like. But just thank you so much, guys, for tuning in tonight. Go ahead and hit the share button and hit that like. Invite some friends. Tell them to come on. So we're going to get started here in a second and make sure that you guys can hear and everything's good. Everything's good. We got all the sounds and everything. We're going to get right into it. So yesterday we discussed some of the more influential founders at the beginning of America. And what was really cool is seeing the history that our founders, like, it was never really talked about and those kind of things. And it was John Adams that actually had said something very, very important. He said, but what do we mean by the American Revolution? He said the revolution that was at the beginning was not by a war. It wasn't by a declaration. It was actually, he said, in the minds and hearts of a people. A change in their religious sentiments of their duties and obligations, and this radical change in the principles, opinions, and sentiments and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. In other words, they couldn't even have begun if they wanted to. Something had to happen spiritually, and that's what kind of took them over. And so you saw from the early 1700s to on, preachers that went out and started preaching against the vices and sins going on in the time. George Whitefield had actually commented, he said, there's a generality of preaching that talks of an unknown, unfelt Christ. And the reason why many congregations are so dead is because dead men are preaching to them. And I want you guys to hear that. Like he said, the reason congregations aren't alive is because the preachers aren't alive. They're not spiritually birthed. And he said, no, we need a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's what we're talking about tonight is, who are some other forgotten ministers? We talked about many of them, but tonight we're going to talk about 4 specific ones. And we're going to start with one of the first black preachers in America. He was actually considered America's first black preacher. It's this guy right here. His name's John Morant. And John Morant was born a free man in June 15th of 1755. And yesterday I actually misspoke. I said that he was born in 1750. It was actually the other fella. But he was born in 1755. And at 13 years old, he went to a revival meeting and he listened to George Whitefield. And what was so cool about that, he went to George Whitefield's meeting and a dramatic conversion happened. And the account was that the Spirit hit him and he collapsed and became paralyzed and mute. And it was said that the only thing that helped his condition was studying the Bible, because he was mute and paralyzed for quite a while, quite some time. And some doctors wanted to give him some medicine. And he said, no, I don't want it. But the only thing that would help him was studying the scriptures. And so his family thought he went insane. He thought, like, it took a while, but he gained back his movement and he could talk. And he left home due to the persistent fighting with his family that was going on in the home. And he wandered in the woods for a long time. Doesn't that sound like somebody? Doesn't that sound like John the Baptist? He wandered in the woods for some time. And then an Indian man found him from the Cherokee tribe and took John to his tribal fort. And him and John actually made a covenant together that they would work together. So they started doing like different, tanning and hiding and those kind of things. Well, this Indian man ended up taking John Morant to their tribe headquarters, basically. And the Indian chief saw him as a threat and sentenced Morant to death. And Morant began to pray to Jesus. He was just in front of his executioner. He's like, man, I need to pray. And this man right here started crying out to Jesus and said, Lord, if this is my end, this is my end. And remember, he was pretty young. He was only about 20 years old. And so he began to pray in front to Jesus, and his bold prayers not only converted his executioner, but convinced the chief to dismiss the sentence. He lived with them for 2 years, converting dozens of them to Christianity. And he returned home and found work on local plantations, and he converted many black slaves to Christianity. He ended up moving to London. I think he became a shoe salesman, and he reconnected with Whitefield, and Whitefield had him join the Methodist clergy, and he was ordained in 1785. He pastored in Nova Scotia, and he moved to Boston with many of the preachers jealous of him that people loved his services more than theirs. He fought for abolition, but his life was cut short, actually. He ended up passing away at the tender age of 35 years old. What's so unique about this guy, John Morant, is that we just never hear about him. We never hear about him, and it's truly, truly despicable and disgusting. And I mean that we don't, if it's truly about race relations and, uplifting black people and these kind of things, why don't we talk about the founding heroes that were preachers, born free men, right? Here's another one. This is really cool. His name's Lemuel Haynes. Lemuel Haynes. Here's a picture of him right there. Doesn't he look like a stud? You know what's crazy about Lemuel? He was the first ordained black pastor in American history. Remember, John Morant was ordained to preach, but he was not a pastor. Lemuel Haynes was ordained to pastor in 1785. He was considered the first black pastor in American history, and he was born in 1753. Here's what's trippy. This is why I don't like the victim mentality, because he was abandoned by his parents at 5 months old. His parents didn't want him, and he was raised as an indentured servant by the Rose family of Massachusetts, and they treated him as their own. Indentured meaning he wasn't a slave or anything like that. They just took him on, and he worked for them. He volunteered after some time, he volunteered in 1774 as a Minuteman, and he joined the Continental Army in October of 1776. And his service was cut short because he developed this disease called typhus, and he was relieved of his duty. And he still wanted to defend the principles of liberty with his life and his tongue. And his political view was shaped because he idealized men like George Washington, and he was a part of the Federalist Party. And after the revolution happened, after the whole war and everything happened, he had interest and gifting for theology and ministry. And they said he was a determined, self-taught student who pored over scripture until he could repeat. He could repeat almost the entire New Testament by memory. How many of us could do that? I mean, I can repeat some scriptures, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a lot to do, repeating the entire New Testament. And he basically was a disciple of Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and a minister named Philip Doddridge. And he studied Greek. Listen to this. This is crazy. For all those people that think, I just got to say this. For all the people that say, man, blacks were oppressed and they were never free. Listen to this. He studied Greek and Latin as his formal training under 2 clergymen from Connecticut. One of them being William Bradford. I think he was one of the governors of Connecticut. And he was licensed to preach in November of 1780. 5 years later, he became the first black ever ordained by a religious body in America. And in 1804, Middlebury College awarded him an honorary master's degree, which was another first for a black minister in America, because that had never happened. But here's the cool thing. He pastored for 40 years. He pastored for 40 straight years. Check this out. This is something, I wish we would talk about this. He pastored for 30 of those years in Vermont to an all-white congregation. To an all-white congregation, he pastored. Now, that's a first of its kind. It was pretty rare, right, because of the race relations. And obviously there were some people who had some contention with that at the time. But nobody talks about that. For 30 years, he pastors an all-white church. So there was division being done away with, right? And then, which was unique, that he grew it from an estimated population of 42 at that church to 350. And he ended up preaching the rest of his life after that, serving in New York, and he died at 80 years old. He had 10 children, and his wife, who was a white school teacher. Never hear about these guys. A preacher that actually helped change America was this guy right here, Lemuel Haynes. So guys, do some homework on these fellas. Learn your history. Teach your children. Teach them what happened at the founding of America. Here's another one. This is really cool. Actually, I'm going to read a quote from Lemuel Haynes. I put this slideshow together kind of last minute. Not last minute as in I didn't know. I just wanted to put this in a precise manner. But listen to what he said. If the church is to prosper and mature, she will need faithful men to lead and care for her. The church will need men who are in sound doctrine, whose lives are guided by the word of God, and who are willing to defend the truth. The church will need to hold up as its ideal those who model fidelity and love toward God, men who will pour themselves out for the benefit of the Lord's sheep. Men of this mold are gifts to the church from her Lord. In the late 1700s, the Lord did indeed give such a gift to the church. That's what he said. Those preachers back then, that's what helped start the revolution. God gave us that gift in the 1700s. A black minister saying, these preachers that I idolize, Whitefield, the white men, right? Because there's all this stuff. He was the one that said that. Isn't that crazy? Here's another one. John Witherspoon. Now, some of you have heard of him. He actually signed the Declaration of Independence. He was actually, they called him the preacher of sedition. He was a seditious preacher. He was the one that was going against the crown. They did not like him either. They all knew him. Everybody from England knew who this cat was. And he was born in Scotland. He was born in Scotland in the 1720s to a minister and his mother, a descendant of John Knox. If you guys don't know who John Knox is, look him up. He was a preacher that confronted Mary, Queen of Scots. So that preacher was awesome, amazing. And his mother was his first teacher. She taught him to read the Bible by 4 years old, and he could recite most of the New Testament. At 4 years old! At 4 years old! How many of us read the scriptures every day? And I'm not laughing because it's funny to me. I'm laughing because we make excuses why we can't read the scriptures. That's what just boggles my mind. Like, here we are. We have the Bible in front of us. And this cat at 4 years old was reading, and he could recite almost all of the New Testament. He was 13 years old when he enrolled at the University of Edinburgh. And he studied in English, classics, mathematics, Latin, Greek, and French at 13. At 13, man. Oh, he published a thesis and got his Master of Arts degree in 3 years. By the time he was 16, dude, he was publishing theses for college. 16! Oh my gosh. By the time he was 20, he got his doctorate of theology degree and he was licensed to preach. By 20 years old, he was a doctor. He became the president of Princeton in 1768, Princeton University. He sailed to Philadelphia from Scotland, and the school grew when he made some curriculum changes, and he also grew the finances, grew an endowment fund for the school and things like that. By 1770, many of the students were advocating the cause of the revolution, and John made a commencement address where he preached about resisting the British crown. He became a part of the Continental Congress afterwards on July 2nd, 1776. There was a delegate, and I'll explain it. What was happening was they were still debating if they should sign the Declaration of Independence, and there was a delegate that was sent. And he basically yelled in front of everybody. He was opposing the revolution, and he said, "We're not even ripe enough for our own revolution," he said. And John responded with this, "Not ripe, sir. We're not only ripe for the measure, but we're in danger of rotting because we lack it. We need to have independence." He said the war came to his college. And so right after they signed the Declaration of Independence, they fought the Revolutionary War. They ended up going to Princeton, ended up bombing the hall that he was at and ransacked his whole office because they knew exactly who he was. And he actually ended up losing 2 sons in the war. But he ended up signing the Declaration of Independence. This preacher was the man. And he ended up signing the Declaration, put his life on the line, and lost 2 sons in the war. How many of you guys knew that about our preachers at all? He influenced so many people and preachers, but some of the founders he influenced were Benjamin Rush, James Madison, and Richard Stockton. Both Benjamin Rush and Richard Stockton signed the Declaration. Madison was considered one of the fathers of the American Constitution. So a preacher helped influence our founders. Does this make sense where I'm going with all this? And these are some of the stories I couldn't hit yesterday, and I don't want to go too long tonight, but here's what he wrote in one of his sermons. He said, "He is the best friend to American liberty who is most sincere and active in promoting true and undefiled religion, and who sets himself with the greatest firmness to bear down on profanity and immorality of every kind. Whoever is an avowed enemy to God, I scruple not to call him an enemy to his country." It's like, dude, if they're an enemy of God, they're not going to be friendly to the country. Do we not see that today? People who are not friendly with the Lord are trying to destroy America and its foundations. Matter of fact, read the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That religion, morality, and knowledge that are essential to the happiness of mankind, it was supposed to be promulgated in the schools, right? And so George Washington in his farewell address said that if you're an enemy to religion and morality, you can't even call yourself a patriot. Where do you think they got those words from? preachers like this. He said, "Do not suppose, my brethren, that I mean to recommend a furious and angry zeal for the circumstances of their religion, or contentions of one sect for another about their peculiar distinctions. I do not wish to he said, I do not wish you to oppose anybody's religion, but I wish you to oppose everybody's wickedness." Does that make sense? He wasn't opposing people's religions. He wasn't trying to go after them physically and fleshy. He was saying it's wicked not to be involved. It's wicked to oppose God. It's wicked to submit to tyranny. He knew that too. And that's why it's so important to read and kind of study why we have a country like this, why it's so important. And even today, saying that if you're a Christian now, you're a nationalist and you're a white supremacist and you want to ban books and all this other stuff, isn't it crazy that the things they're accusing us of, they're doing themselves? They don't want us to preach out of the scriptures. Why? Because it's heretical to them. It's diabolical, if you will. They just about a year and a half ago, put warning signs up on our Constitution, Declaration of Independence over at the National Archives. So they're saying we're trying to ban books when they're the ones trying to ban speech at every turn, right? They're imposing all these stupid things, and what they're accusing us of, they're actually doing themselves. And this is why you cannot listen to the accuser of the brothers. You cannot listen to Satan. You can't listen to those voices. You just can't do it. You got to make sure you're hearing the word of the Lord, right? Here's one of the last preachers I'm going to talk about tonight. His name's Patrick Henry. Now, he wasn't a pastor or anything, but he was a Christian, and I actually brought him up for a reason, because a lot of people know his speech and the ending of his speech. You guys know it? Give me liberty or give me death. You guys ever heard of that? Everybody that's been to any kind of place in America, you hear it July 4th. It's on, bumper stickers and T-shirts. Give me liberty or give me death. And they actually labeled him the eloquent thunderer. He was such a preacher. He was inspired by his religious faith and passion for liberty. Patrick Henry not only fought against British tyranny, but also fought against the U.S. Constitution. I'll explain more in a minute. Not against it for the sake of it being wrong. There was just some things he wanted about religious liberty, and so we'll explain in a second. And before becoming a successful self-taught lawyer in 1760, he was educated by his father, and Henry's modest background won him the title of Man of the People. Matter of fact, they said when he would go preach, he went and preached in Virginia, and he was with some richer kind of aristocratic type people, and they said this is too basic. Like his language won't translate to our people, because they were pretty rich. Virginia was the richest colony in the nation at the time, and so they had all the rich bloods, and they had that kind of education. Well, remember, he's self-taught, so he's talking like you and I, just like "What's up, bro?" kind of talk, right? But he's being so real about the revolution that he's winning the people over. Guys, remember, go ahead and comment below if you've never heard this before. If you've never heard about it, comment amen and that all those other things, and take these pictures and the names and stuff. In 1765, he was elected to the Virginia legislature, and 10 days after taking his seat, he started the sparks of revolution by calling the king and parliament tyrants for taxing the people without their consent. Oh, jeez. You know what else he fought against? Churches that were forcing their congregants to tithe. So he was actually famous for that. He went up against a few churches that were forcing their congregants and lying to them and forcing them to tithe. You should give out of your heart cheerfully, not being forced to. So he was a very popular man. During the next 10 years, Henry became the leader of the revolutionary movement in Virginia. They called him the Son of Thunder. Read Mark 3 when you get a chance. Mark 3:17. They called him the Son of Thunder. That's why his speeches were so compelling, because they came from the heart. And he became the first governor of Virginia after they declared their own independence and helped set up their government. His exposure to Presbyterian Calvinism during the Great Awakening fueled his attack of the U.S. Constitution. He was concerned that the new government relied too much on the virtue of their office holders. In other words, we're depending too much on the morality of the people in office instead of the checks and balances that should have happened. And it was because of him that we actually drafted a Bill of Rights. And so he was saying, I don't trust government officials, man. We got to have something that's going to secure our rights. So that's why they wrote and helped write he was one of the people who helped write the Bill of Rights. And he was a key figure in getting them in 1791. He became alarmed after all that, after the nation was founded, after all the war was over and all these other things. And around 1791-92, there was a biography that was written about him. He said he became alarmed with the increase of deism and atheism coming from the French philosophers, and he called it the godless revolution. They wanted their own liberty and independence, but they were doing it without the Lord. And so they were coming over here to America saying, hey, get involved in our fight. We helped you fight. Why can't you guys help us? John Adams was like, no, like we don't have any money for that. And Jefferson's like, what are you talking about, man? Let's go do this thing, right? So this whole war was going on for a long time. But he was afraid about the atheism and despotism that was coming from the French philosophers and their godless revolution. And he unretired and ran for public office again and won. But he got very sick and he passed away before taking office. Some consider him to be the real father of the country. Some consider him to be the real champion for our nation. And so I'm going to read a part of his speech to kind of dovetail this whole thing. And I want you to just sit back and listen to his words, because all we hear from his speech is give me liberty or give me death, right? But I want you to hear the references to the Lord in his speech here. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I did some editing of it. But while he was waiting, while Virginia was waiting on a response from the King of England in 1775, they sent something called an olive branch to the king. What that means is they were basically saying, hey, King, we just want our rights back, so we're petitioning you through our olive branch and saying, hey, don't get mad at us. We just want our rights back, right? And then so they were waiting for a response, and a lot of the Virginia convention was basically telling Patrick Henry, we're not ready to fight, man. We're not ready to do this. Don't do this right now. And he was like, look, I need to say something right now. So he stood up at St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia on March 23rd, 1775. And I just want you to hear these words. It was very cool. He said, should I keep back my opinions at such a time through fear of giving offense? I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my country and of an act of disloyalty towards the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. He said, are fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? He said, if the king really wanted us to be reconciled, why is he sending armies? That sounds like force to me. That's not love and reconciliation. That's force. He wants to force us to submit to him. He said, have we shown ourselves to be so unwilling to be reconciled that force must be called upon to win back our love? Let us not deceive ourselves, sir. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments which kings resort to. If a person won't submit, guess what they're going to do? They're going to fight you. They're going to make you submit. Isn't that what's kind of happening in our government right now? Remember COVID? If you don't submit, you're going to lose your job. You lose your 501c3, whatever they threatened with, right? Lose your job, and your family was against you. That's what tyrants do. They don't want you to obey them. They want you to submit to them, right? He says this, there is no longer any room for hope in waiting for their response. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve and violate those inestimable privileges for which we've been so long contending, we must fight, he said. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that's left for us. I never heard that in a history book. He said, it's God that's going to get us through. He said, tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? So the whole legislation was saying, we're too weak for this. We can't fight right now. He's saying, well, when are we going to get stronger then? He said, next week, next year? Are the fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? And then he says this, gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. Read Jeremiah. He said, gentlemen are crying right now, peace, peace, but there is no peace. You're saying you want peace, but the king's telling you no. He said, the war has already begun. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand by here idle? He said, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? He said, forbid it, Almighty God. Forbid it. He said, I don't know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And he started this whole fire in Virginia. And they said, no mas, man, we're moving forward now. He knew his God. They appealed to the general of the armies of heaven. These cats knew scripture, man. They were not slouches. These guys weren't fools. Like I said yesterday, 26 of the 55 signers of the Declaration had seminary degrees. I'm not saying they were preachers. I'm saying they got seminary degrees. Why? They had to learn the scriptures. Listening to preachers back in the day was the most important thing that they had. They didn't have anything else. And when you look at some of these preachers, especially nowadays, I think about what we leave behind. And these guys were saying, if we don't fight now, what are our kids going to have in their future? We're leaving our kids with the burden of a king who doesn't even care about what we're saying right now. As a matter of fact, he's not even listening to God. There was actually some historians had actually brought up that the Declaration, all the rights listed in the Declaration of Independence came from sermons all the way through 1763. Listen to that. And the guy actually said, imagine reading the Declaration of Independence as a list of sermons. I was like, that's a unique way to look at it. All the rights listed were actually written by sermons from the preachers at the time founding in America. And they knew what they were talking about. Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, Dr. Mayhew, he actually preached a sermon in 1730 on Romans 13. And he was talking about we're not to submit to every authority when they're no longer an authority. When they're tyrants, we must disobey. We have a duty to disobey. And that's why we wanted to talk about this tonight. I wanted to keep it short because I know it's July 3rd and I didn't want to take up a lot of your time. But I pray that you guys learn something through this. And hopefully through this month, you guys go back and start looking at some of the forgotten founders. You go back and start looking at some of the forgotten heroes of the faith, some of the black ministers that were at the time that we don't ever hear about. Right? Absalom Jones and all these other cats. And I pray that you guys just don't hear, like these recent Supreme Court decisions. I didn't really mention this yesterday. I wish I would have. But these recent Supreme Court decisions, share this video, by the way. Don't listen to what the media is saying about those Supreme Court decisions. I pray that you guys will go see the decision and read it yourself. And that you're not listening to the twisting and the bending of the words that are going on in these Supreme Court decisions through the media. That we see it for what it really is. We're getting rid of racism in colleges, right? No, this Gabe Baker does not have to print anything she doesn't want to. She never refused service to them. She just said, I can't print that from my conscience. I'll make you anything else. She was willing to work for them. But these people were literally looking to pick a fight, I promise you. Because there's tons of other bakers that are gay and they were willing to do all that stuff. But they were doing this for a reason, to come after this lady's rights, to destroy her. And I just want you guys to know that it's not about even picking fights. It's really about standing for righteousness. And when you do that, people will stand with you. It may not look like it at first, and you may be alone, but it's okay. Because one man with God is a majority. I can't remember who said it. I don't know if it was I think it was Thomas Jefferson. It was some variation of that quote. But I'm going to also quote George Washington when he said, the harder the conflict, the greater the triumph. Folks, we don't have a choice anymore. It's at our doorstep. It's at our doorstep. So now, in the next few months, actually in the next couple months, you're going to hear some really cool things coming out of Revive Church, what we're doing locally, and how it's going to translate to other churches. Man, I'm so stoked about it. Our ministry and Revive is working together to do that. And we're so grateful that Pastor Todd and Jan are willing to open the doors for us to do this and take our faith to the streets, take our faith to the schools, take our faith to public action, because that's what it's all about. And folks, they wouldn't even have these rights if it wasn't preachers standing up for these rights, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and knowing that we're all created equal. We all may be different, but we're all created equal under God's eyes and have the same protections. And so now it's up to us to pray and fight. It's up to us to take the mantle on. It's up to us to go out and preach and find out what really all the truth is. And then, so we're not deceived in it. Start reading the scriptures daily. And I'm not kidding when I'm saying that. I know it's an overdone phrase, but folks, you cannot... How do you know? How do you tell a crooked stick? You lay a straight one next to it, right? You can't judge and discern without knowing the scriptures. Because what are you discerning by? What's your litmus test? What's the standard, right? Start reading. Start praying. Start studying. And again, go do your homework and research. Go find out the truth of these preachers. Go find out the truth of these folks. And God will lead you to the truth like he's done to so many of us. So I just want to bless you guys tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my wonderful monologue. I feel like I'm on the radio, like in the 40s. Thank you for tuning in to Revive Church and our evening sessions of Revive Talk. Tune in next week as we delve into other issues that Pastor Todd will come back with. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this broadcast, and we pray that you share it, you comment, and we love you.